Hello and welcome to session 2 of these revision chapters, if you like. In this one I'm going to be talking about deconfliction with military traffic. In session 1, if you haven't already seen it, we're talking about gliders, so in other words avoiding each other. Now we're looking at military traffic and a few other rules and regs that you need to know about as well. Okay. Most military activity in the UK, flying activity, happens on Monday to Friday. And if you are flying your hang glider or your paraglider in an area which is used for low flying training, like I'm thinking of Salisbury Plain or South Wales, the Yorkshire Dales, the Peak District, most of Western Scotland, there's quite a lot on, then you'll be aware that there is a potential risk of conflict with those aircraft. So we have this system, the Civil Aviation Notification Procedure, which enables us to notify the military which site we expect to be flying, and therefore obviously they can either plan to try and avoid that area if they can, or at least they can keep a good lookout for us. So there's the two ways of doing this. The first one is the 0800 number that you can see here. And what you do is you ring up that 0800 number. Hopefully you'd have your site guide open in front of you, and you say, hello, it'll be the low flying booking cell that you speak to. It used to be at West Drayton, I'm not sure if they still are. And you say, yes, I'd like to notify some, let's say, paragliding activity for tomorrow. And there will be half a dozen of us and we'll be flying at this site. Now, the half a dozen thing is important. If you say it's just me, they might think, well, that's not a big enough reason to avoid, to reroute people. So it's worth saying there's always a group of people, because inevitably there is a group of people. In fact, there was an airprox, which is a near miss between a military aircraft and some paragliders in 2019. And although there were loads of paragliders there, only one person had rung, and even they didn't wait to get their reference number. Anyway, so you ring the number. They will say, where are you going? So you say, okay, I'm going to be flying on this site. They won't know the site names, of course. So you either have a site code, which will be in your, for regularly used sites, the site code, which will be in your club site guide, or you give them a 6-figure grid reference, which will also be there, or you can look it up for yourself. So a few of you, you're going to be flying on this site and they want to know the time. So let's say from 10 AM till dusk, and the area, well, from the ground to say cloud base at 4,000 feet. Give them that information. They then check that that's not going to conflict with something they've already got going on or that you need to know about. And they tend to call you back. They take a phone number and they call you back with a reference number. So that's basically the original system. Unfortunately, although some schools were pretty good at it and some individuals and clubs were fairly useful at it, there are quite a lot of pilots who would go flying. They wouldn't think about where they were going until the morning, and then they wouldn't use the CANOP or the CAN-P system. And as mentioned, this has already had one serious consequence. There have been a couple of others which have been a little bit dodgy as well. Fortunately, there's never been an actual collision. However, there could be, and therefore we do have to be careful about this. Now, because of this issue, in 2020, a couple of BHPA pilots, Chris Williams and Pete Logan, with help from other guys on the FSC airspace panel, have put together an improved system. So they have a website now. So that's the web address that you can see here. The web address basically allows you to go onto that. So make a note of it if you don't know it already. And all the clubs in the UK, certainly all the ones that have sites that are affected by low flying, have listed their sites on there. So you can go onto it and you say, let's go flying. I'm going to go tomorrow, say Milk Hill. So you click on your local club site list, click on Milk Hill and submit a NOTAM. It's as simple as that. And the beauty of this is not only does it go to the military things, it also turns it into a regular NOTAM. So all the general aviation pilots who are out flying their Piper Cubs or helicopters or whatever will also be able to see it. Okay, there are a couple of limitations. The first one is you need to get it done by 2000 hours or 8 o'clock the night before to make sure that it goes out to people. If you don't know where you're going and then or you change your mind and you do it at least 5 hours before you go flying in the morning, then it will have some limited effect. Some people will be able to see it, which is better than nobody. But if you do it before 8 o'clock the night before, then almost all the military pilots who are looking at it will be able to, you know, reroute if necessary. You say, well, I don't like the look of that, let's go around here, because they don't want a mid-air collision any more than we do. So that's what I suggest. The second thing is, as mentioned earlier, it's only Monday to Friday. So you can submit it on a Sunday night for a Monday, but for a weekend, I mean, the idea is there's very little military activity going on Saturday and Sunday, unless they've got a big exercise. Okay. Finally, it actually notifies a small area, 2 nautical miles radius, I believe, around the site that you're notifying. So if you go across country or you leave that area, then obviously it's no longer valid. So that's the CAN-P system. Why bother to do it? It's a bit of a hassle. Well, this picture is a pretty old picture, but it's a military jet that was involved in a bird strike. And see the damage there. I understand. Somebody told me that this was rooks. They'd hit a few rooks which weigh, I don't know, 300 grams, 400 grams each, something like that. So you can imagine the mess you'd make. So they don't want a collision any more than we do. So that bird strike, yeah. So that's the CAN-P system. Just generally as well, any of you are familiar with the 500,000 or 250,000 air charts will know there's a little note on it saying because of military traffic, it's recommended to fly above 1,000 feet. And the reason why is that in low flying areas, that's where all their exercises are done. If the military are doing a transit from one area to another, they'll do it above cloud base, so it's not a problem to us. But if they're doing low flying training, it's going to be below 1,000 feet, and frankly, it's going to usually be above 200 feet above the ground because, you know, there's pylons and windmills that high. So you've got that kind of sandwich of air where all the action takes place. So if you're away from the site that you've NOTAM'd through the CAN-P system, say you're on a cross country in South Wales, and you're getting a bit low and you get down to 1,000 feet, below 1,000 feet, when you're there going down to land or just trying to scratch around there, that is where you are most at risk and where you're advised not to hang about. So if it's an area where there's low flying training or you've seen military aircraft around, frankly, sub 1,000 feet, if you can't catch something pretty quickly, just go and set up a landing is my advice. If you find yourself floating along in sort of zeros at sort of 600 or 700 feet for ages, you're at a much higher risk of collision with military traffic. Okay, irrespective of where you are, if you are concerned about military traffic, if you hear a jet or you hear a helicopter or something like that, my advice is you immediately do a tight 360-degree turn. The reason is fairly self-evident. If you've got a paraglider only about this deep, and it's, you know, if it's coming straight at you, it's a pretty thin profile, you know, thin lines and pod harnesses and so forth. And also we're traveling very slowly, so we're hidden against ground clutter, so we're difficult to see. If you obviously bank up and do a turn, then suddenly you've got, you know, 26 square meters, so it's a lot easier to see. And the same with the hang glider. And obviously the motion catches the pilot eye as well, the change of bank. So with me, it's like a Pavlovian reaction almost. Hear a jet, do a turn. That is my advice as well. Minimise the risk of collision. The jets that you've heard, you might well have already missed, but they often travel in pairs. So it's not the one that's gone by that you worry about, it's his mate who's following on. So minimise your time in that area. Constant vigilance is vital. Okay, a couple of other rules and regs while we're on this. Towing, tow launching. If you are the one who is being towed, then you should be aware that there is a limit of 200 feet or 60 metres above ground level unless you have a tow site permit. The tow site permit must be current and it must be certified by the CAA so that it is on all the air charts. The reason is self-evident once again. You know, if you're flying along in your light aircraft, you don't want to run into a 2 mil steel wire going up to 2,000 feet, which you had no idea was there, be invisible. So a huge risk. So all tow charts have this symbol which is marked on the air chart. So if you apply for a tow permit for a field, it's going to take months, I'll warn you now, months, more than a year probably, to get it, because they have to inform all the other air users, and when everybody's had their say and all decide it's okay, if it is, then they have to put it on all the air charts to make sure that everybody has got a current air chart and knows that the cables are going to be there. Okay, so yeah, some schools do hand towing up to sort of 50 metres, but mostly if you're going to use a winch or any kind of serious towing, you need the tow permit. Okay, radios. This is a bit of a thorny one. It's a bit of a historical issue for us as hang glider and paraglider pilots as well. You have to bear in mind that the Air Navigation Order and the part of it that is to do with communications is written with all air users in mind. So they're thinking, the people who write it, about people who are equipped with airband radios in general aviation. So the rules as written down in the ANO are this. It must be an airband type approved by the CAA. You can't just use something that might wander off frequency. In fact, these days they have to have quite tight spacing, 8.33 megahertz spacing. So even old airband radios are no good now. The operator should have a flight radio telephony operator's license, which is an exam that you take to get a little stamp. They're actually quite easy to do. It doesn't take very long to pick up the jargon, but it's important that somebody knows how to use an airband radio, because if they're talking to air traffic control or other pilots, there's a certain form of words that they use, and you expect that they will understand what air traffic control is saying to them. And they have to know things about how to make emergency calls, mayday calls, pan, all that kind of thing, and identification and so forth. So you need to go through all the jargon and learn how to do it. It's not too difficult to do, and very useful if you want to talk to air traffic control or someone running a MATS or something like that. However, that is the law, that you can't transmit without that license, if you like. Right. Because a lot of sport aviation, parachutists, balloonists, we don't want to, go through, ask permission to transit a bit of airspace or something like that. We don't really want to do all that. So they've given us 6 frequencies. For many years it's been like this, for sport aviation, to sort of try and keep us happy and use airband radios. Unfortunately, 6 frequencies is hopelessly inadequate. There's only one that's allocated to hang gliding or paragliding. Infuse the others. I've tried to use airband radios for training, and 60 miles away there's a parachute school that's on the same frequency with a powerful transmitter, and the aeroplane just floods out any transmission. So obviously my students can't hear me, so that's hopeless. So realistically there just aren't enough frequencies available to us anyway, so it's not very useful. So as a result, this is what pilots do. They use 2-meter radios, which are cheap, they're very efficient, and they work very well, even in quite rough terrain, although they're principally line of sight, as you'll know. However, it's worth pointing out that the law, as it's written down in the ANO, is that you should not transmit with a radio from the air unless you've got the right license and the right radio. So there you are, I've told you. A little bit muddy because we're no longer in Europe as I'm recording this, but European law was that 2-meter radios are legal, so there was some sort of conflict between UK and European law. In the UK, to use a 2-meter radio at all on the ground, you're supposed to have a radio amateur's license or a ham radio license. But this is quite a historical thing. I mean, now we all use mobile phones, which are radios, and little PMR radios. So as far as I'm aware, there's never been a case of a pilot being hauled up for using a 2-meter radio, because it's not something that's actively enforced, but that's what the law is, so now you know. Okay, some of the general flying rules that we need to know about. Do not fly in a careless or a negligent manner. Well, negligent and careless are nice vague words. It's a bit like the police's interpretation of dangerous driving. Basically, if you have an accident, then someone can say you've probably been careless or negligent. Interestingly, I am aware of a solicitor. There was an incident a few years ago now, I don't think it went anywhere, where a paraglider pilot injured a walker, hit them when they lost control on the ground. And the lawyer for the walker, who was trying to get some compensation for his client's injuries, took the view that the pilot must have been negligent, not only because he hit his customer, but because it turned out he had no rating. He wasn't qualified or been to any school or anything like that. So he thought that was a pretty good definition of negligent and that they would win. So I think it was settled. But in any case, don't do anything stupid, basically. Nothing should be dropped except ballast in the form of fine, dry sand or water. Clearly, if you drop even something really small like a GoPro camera from a couple of thousand feet and it hits someone on the head, it's going to be a serious incident. So it's up to you as the commander of the aircraft to make sure everything is attached firmly. If you're going to carry cameras or phones or anything like that you're going to pull out during flight, then they should have a safety line on them. Okay. No one may fly when intoxicated by drugs or alcohol. Right, I'll go into this in more detail in another session on human factors, what the law to do with drugs and alcohol and medication and so forth. All I will say at this point is that any alcohol in your system, the legal limit for being a commander of an aircraft is less than 1 unit of alcohol. So basically doesn't mix. And if you should be unlucky enough to have an accident and they do a tox test on you in hospital or in the morgue, and they find alcohol in your system or other drugs, then that could have repercussions on insurance and negligence and all that kind of thing. So just don't do it. Okay, no person may be carried on a glider unless the glider is certified for dual and the pilot has the requisite license. Well, we're getting into sort of BHPA thing here. The paragliders or hang gliders for that matter, there are solo ones and there are dual ones, and you can't fly with two people on a solo glider, otherwise no insurance and all that kind of thing, apart from the licensing of the pilot. So if you want to fancy using your child as ballast because you haven't got any sand or water, I'm sorry, not allowed. Okay, and float by a suitably qualified pilot. Okay, the BHPA, just a few things. There are a few regulations from the BHPA you need to know about, so this is a good session to do them. This is the Executive Council. The BHPA is 7,500 at the time of talking, 7,500 pilots roughly. And all of us as a group of pilots just get together and we elect some of our fellow pilots as members of the Executive Council, just so that they can run the association to make sure we've got insurance and all that kind of stuff, and run the offices. So there's a Flying and Safety Committee which is reports to the Executive Council, and the Flying and Safety Committee is a group, and like the exec, they're all volunteers, nobody gets paid for doing this, and they write down what rules and operating procedures and all those things try and keep us safe in a thing called the Technical Manual. So the Technical Manual is the kind of book of the operations manual, if you like, for the BHPA, and there's everything in there. If you want to know about what you need to know to be qualified as a tow coach, you can just look for it. It's a public document, it's on the BHPA website, and it's a searchable PDF, so you can actually just type in tow coach and every page that's got the word tow coach will come up and so forth. So a very useful resource, and it's a living document. The Flying and Safety Committee have a few meetings a year, and at those very often members of the association will say, oh yes, we'd like to change the rules slightly on signalling for tow is one that's come up recently, or the entry criteria to do an aerotow course and things like that. So it's put forward to the FSC, who consider the idea, and they might have a trial, they might say yes, or they might say no, we don't like the look of this, or we've tried it before and it didn't work and we can't do it. So that's how it works. The FSC make the rules which go into the Technical Manual, but the whole thing is a voluntary process. And then finally is the club structure. So clubs, once again, all the club people are volunteers, of course. The way training works in the UK is we teach up to club pilot level, which is probably for most pilots a couple of hours airtime, something like that. It's not very long. You can get it in, probably 10 or 12 days training, sometimes a little bit more, depends how you're spaced out. So it's a pretty low level. And the reason this works is because people get their club pilot or their club pilot novice rating, to give it its full name, and then they join a club where there's more experienced pilots who kind of handhold a little bit and say, okay, we'll coach you today. There is, it's not very good for you, or just wait till the weather's better, or give them a few hands until they build up a little bit of experience. But it works as long as everybody contributes to this system. And again, all the coaches are volunteers. So do take advantage of the club structure. I mean, we could have a really high CP level at 25 hours, so your pilot level, and then you go off and do it, and you don't need much help. And in some countries, that's pretty well how it works. But then it would cost thousands of pounds and take a couple of years for you to learn. So we think that's probably a bad idea overall. So it's a fairly low level, but it's because we've got a good club structure in the UK, and those club coaches are very willing to help. So do take advantage of that and stay safe. So changing environments, the BHPA rating that you get, if you get a hill rating, it's just for flying. We have a disciplined environment. So it's paragliding hill is the disciplined environment. So if you're paragliding hill, you can't just go towing unless you get a conversion course, which should be done by an instructor or a senior tow coach. Same thing, if you want to buy a paramotor, do a power conversion course, and so forth. So just so that you know that your ratings are only for the thing it's written down for. So those are the different environments: hill, power and tow, and if you're a hang glider pilot, aerotow as well, behind a tug. Licenses are slightly different. They're not, in BHPA speak, a rating is something that you've got for yourself, and a license, like CP or pilot, a license is something you do with somebody else or a bit of equipment. So dual pilot instructor emergency parachute packer or a winch operator. These are all licenses, and they're slightly different. A license you get by being examined by an external person, an examiner, and also every year you have to have a renewal form where you write down what your currency is. So you have to say, yes, I've done this many tows or this much teaching, and somebody else has to sign it, the declaration of support, to keep your license current. There aren't very many rules for individual members. There are a few for schools and things, but individual members, but there are, sort of about 9 rules, I think. But one of them is this: a suitable helmet must be worn. So if you're not flying a helmet, then, the BHP insurance won't be that interested, I would guess. However, what does suitable mean? Well, there is an air sports standard for helmets, which you might be able to see on the white helmet here, which is EN 966. And that's kind of the gold standard. It means that it's got a good field of vision. It doesn't, the actual brim doesn't get in the way of you seeing anything, upwards and so forth. And it means that it's passed the various penetration and drop tests. So that's what I would recommend. And I say all schools have to do that. But if you fly a different kind of helmet, that's not necessarily a problem. And there are some other helmets, and the other picture, the black one, is a snow sports helmet. It's actually also certified to 966, the one in this picture, but there are some that aren't. So that's the actual certification. There is 1077. So 1077 snow sports helmet, obviously for snowboarding or skiing. They tend to be nice and light, and the penetration resistance is very similar. So they're fine. There are 2 flavors, however. There's an A and a B. The A is pretty good. It's not far off the 966, but the B, frankly, is much lower standard. I think the drop test, they drop them onto a pointed thing. Instead of from a meter, it's 37 centimeters, so it's far less. So if you see a helmet in a supermarket that's 29 quid and you think that's a nice helmet, have a look. If it says 1077, if it doesn't say A, then you have to assume that it's only a B, and frankly, in my personal opinion, not suitable. Cycle helmets aren't suitable, canoeing helmets aren't suitable. Motorcycle helmets, I have had a student who arrived on his motorcycle and he wanted to wear his own helmet on the grounds that it was better protection. He's a cautious guy. And he's quite right, the impact test for a motorcycle helmet is a higher standard than the air sports helmet, but it doesn't conform because they come low on the temple and they go out quite a long way. So it did, we had a look at it, and it did definitely interfere with his upward and forward vision, which is really important. And also you can't hear the air because it was all padded around his ears, so you can't hear the airflow, which obviously has a problem when you're judging your airspeed, especially when you're near the store. So they're not really suitable either. The other thing about the mass of helmets, they're quite heavy, which some motorcycle helmets are. That has some implications with whiplash as well. So 966 or 1077A. There is an American thing as well, the ATSM 2040, and that's very similar to the 1077 standard. There's an article all about helmets and testing, all that, if you're interested, that was in Skywing. I think it was in 2018. Logbook. You should keep a logbook, just for various reasons. Personal record of your flights and information, so when you're granddad you can say, oh yeah, I remember flying the long wind when 40 years ago, whatever it may be, but just so you can refresh your history, really. Importantly, it provides evidence of your currency. So if you are, say, a club pilot and you're going for a pilot qualification, the first thing someone's going to do is say, well, have you got your 25 hours yet, or whatever it may be. If you want to be a dual pilot, one of the prerequisites, you must have 200 hours logged, and so forth. Other levels, ratings, licenses all require a certain amount of record keeping. It doesn't have to be one of these. It doesn't have to be a paper logbook. You can do it in anything you like. You can do it in an exercise book if you like. A lot of people these days keep them on their phones, or they have a digital one on their computer. Doesn't matter, but do keep a flight log. Okay. If you're an instructor or a winch operator or something like that, then you need 2 logs. You need your own personal flying log, but also how many dual flights you've done or how much instructing you've done, and so forth. Right, red streamer, I've touched on this already. If you're inexperienced, you should attach a red streamer to your glider. If it's a hang glider, it goes on the king post so everybody can see it. If it is a paraglider, you put it on the center of the trailing edge. It just means it just tells all the other pilots you've got less than 10 hours and to give you a large space, so it's in your interest to fly with one. And obviously you're flying with other people, you can tell their inexperience, which is worth knowing. Occasionally on paragliders you see people tie them onto their harnesses. In the old days everybody used to do this, but I've run into a couple of problems with that. When you're reverse launching on a paraglider, sometimes the streamer comes around the front and it gets wrapped around a riser or something. It can get in the way and you can't see it anyway because it's tangled up. And in one case I'm aware of, it came around and got wrapped around somebody's brake line. They turned around and pulled, and they actually pulled the control line back through the pulley, including the bit streamer, which then got jammed. So they jammed that pulley. So it was a big, they didn't manage to take off, fortunately, but it was significant, potential accidents there. So stick them on the trailing edge. They're much easier to see from there as well for other pilots. If you put them on the back of a harness, they can get sort of tangled up in your sort of wake vortex and flattened against the back of the harness. It makes them hard to see, which takes away the point. Okay, so that's red streamers. All right, so that's the end of it. So that's the civil aviation notification procedure and a few other things that you need to know, rules and regs. I hope you found that useful.